It's Wednesday, March 23rd, 2016, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons. Here with me are Missouri School of Journalism colleagues Ryan Thomas and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, the many storylines coming out of President Obama's trip to Cuba. Hulk Hogan awarded nearly $140 million in damages from Gawker, what that could mean for the future of that site. And 10 years of Twitter. We'll talk about how we've seen our industry change through microblogging. There's a whole lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well, but we're going to start with the early morning attacks yesterday in Brussels. I woke up really early looking to turn on an old rerun of Law & Order with the hope of falling back to sleep. That didn't happen because before I could find Jerry Orbach, I found the special reports coming out of Brussels. A series of explosions at the airport, dozens injured, and then word of explosions at metro stations at the height of the morning rush. My first thought when I heard about all of this is, where are our students? Are they okay? Yes, all 16 of them and our faculty member who's there with them as well are present and accounted for. And like good journalists, they did what they had to do, including covering the story. Here's a portion of a dispatch Hannah Knutson filed for KOMU.
Hannah Knutson is in Brussels now. She was at the airport shortly after the explosion and filed this report earlier this afternoon.
I'm Hannah Knutson here at the Brussels International Airport, where earlier this morning an explosion happened, killing 11 people and injuring 81, according to a Belgian health minister. Now, I heard about the news shortly before I went to work, and on my way to work, a second attack happened at the Maalbach metro station. As soon as I got to work, we grabbed a camera crew and came down here and tried to cover this.
So it was yeoman's work for students to get right out there in the thick of all of this and start reporting. Hannah making her way to the airport along with all of the other professional journalists.
Yeah, that's really not what they're supposed to be doing. Students who are in our Brussels program are really told to stay out of harm's way when they're doing that. And many of them did cover the story from the safety of their desk at their various internships. But I mean, this is one of those things I woke up early that morning and I saw the email that was sent from our global programs office about what had happened, and immediately turned on the BBC to get the reports. But you know, it's the first thing you think about anytime that something happens overseas, because we have so many students who are doing internships around the world. First thing, at least I think about, is, do we have any students there? Do we have any faculty there? And are they okay?
It's a hard thing to do in terms of this being a traumatic reporting experience for adults. I don't want to say that our students aren't professionals, because they're acting as professionals, but people who have years of professional experience to live this at the same time they're reporting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of surreal for them. I heard a report this morning that one of our students said it's one thing when you're back on campus or you're back at home and you're looking at this on television, but then when you wake up in the morning or you're headed to work that morning and all of a sudden you hear about these things going on right in the town that you're in, you start to look around and worry about, okay, what's going on, or how safe am I, those types of things.
One of the other things that stood out to me as I was watching some of this coverage, especially in the early morning hours. I started watching on ABC News and a little bit on CNN, going back and forth. This is at like the 3 and 4 and 5 o'clock hours. And then later, as kind of the A team, Savannah Guthrie and Matt Lauer taking over on the Today Show, there seemed to have been a lot more restraint in the coverage and people slowing down, taking a minute before putting user-generated content or really graphic images out on the air, like maybe we had seen in some of the past terrorist attacks.
Yeah, there was a very good opinion column by Simon Jenkins in The Guardian that talked about how media coverage can become very problematic in issues like this, fueling anxieties, just the intense pressure to get any and all information out. And what he called for was what he described as a more patient journalism that stops, takes a minute, and just thinks through the consequences of what it's going to do. And I certainly, the bits and pieces that I've seen seem to be a bit slower, a bit more methodical, a bit more analytical. And that's probably a good thing, and it's certainly learning from the lessons of those previous mistakes.
On the Media, which is a program not all that different than ours that comes from the East Coast, they had an image that they had started tweeting out, sharing on social media. There is copy of it on our links blog that you can see. It had maybe about a dozen different reminders, both for journalists and for the audience, in thinking about what you're sharing, how you're sharing, what voices you're including in the coverage, when it's credible and when it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to sort of follow those steps. I mean, I started looking at the coverage on the BBC yesterday morning because I didn't want to see what was on CNN or MSNBC or Fox or any of the others because I was afraid that it was going to be overhyped. And then I watched that for about a half an hour, and then I switched over to CNN and began to watch CNN coverage. And as Ryan said, it was a lot more muted, a lot tame, a lot more analytical, provided a lot more context. And then I got to thinking about that because I knew we were going to be talking about it on the show today. Whether or not, if this had happened in the United States, would we have seen that same kind of coverage? The fact that it happened in Brussels, that you had European reporters covering it, even the reporters who were covering it for the United States network for U.S. outlets were European, and they were very much subdued and thinking in the terms that Ryan described. So I was wondering if that may have had something to do with the coverage that we were seeing yesterday in Brussels, as opposed to say if this happened in New York or Washington or somewhere in the States.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder to what extent general lessons have been learned versus this something that's just particular to this particular attack.
Talk a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, if there are lessons that could be learned for the long term in terms of journalistic practices, or if it's that's particular to this particular incident, as Earnest describes, right? We've got a lot of different variables going on here. If there was a terrorist attack in the United States, would we see a return to the old model of the sort of sensationalism, get any and all information out there at all costs, or would it be the kind of more reflective media we've seen in the Brussels attack?
Okay, well, before those explosions rocked Brussels, all eyes were on Havana for President Obama's diplomatic trip to Cuba. It was billed as the dawn of a new day, a new openness between the United States and Cuba. But even during a time of reconstruction and reconciliation, old grievances over disputes on human rights marred the moment.
Destroying a bridge can be an easy and quick undertaking. However, its solid reconstruction can prove a lengthy and challenging endeavor. It will also be necessary to return the territory illegally occupied by Guantanamo Naval Base.
I bring with me the greetings and the friendship of the American people. We have a half a century of work to catch up on. Our growing engagement with Cuba is guided by one overarching goal: advancing the mutual interest of our two countries, including improving the lives of our people, both Cubans and Americans. That's why I'm here. I've said consistently, after more than 5 very difficult decades, the relationship between our governments will not be transformed overnight. We continue, as President Castro indicated, to have some very serious differences, including on democracy and human rights. A part of normalizing relations means that we discuss these differences directly.
And it ended with this awkward exchange.
Thank you for your participation.
Obama going to shake Castro's hand and wrap him in an embrace, only to be rebuked. That video clip that we were watching, I actually pulled that off of the YouTube channel for RT, for Russia Today Television. I'm actually looking right now for our radio audience. You should kind of see this awkward smile and giggle that Earnest has right now. But that kind of showed some of the spirit of what was going on here. There was some reconciliation. There was some efforts towards repairing a decades-long strained relationship, but everybody still had their guard up.
Yes, they did. I mean, it was there was some things in Castro's speech that was uncomforting to Americans and the president and vice versa, and I think you saw that sort of uneasiness or hesitancy on the part of both leaders at the end there with the, are we going to shake hands? Are we going to hug? Are we going to try to do a bro hug? Well, how's this going to go?
And Obama went in for the bro hug, and Castro was having no part of it.
Yeah. I think the long-term effect of this will be hard to tell because it's probably going to play into the election season. So, but it's certainly, we've seen a minor chill, and whether that'll sort of last is to be seen, I think.
Yeah, they have. I mean, the one thing that I found, if you go and look at the coverage, is that much of it was really hyped up over the weekend with Obama going there, and then I think what happened yesterday in Brussels kind of toned a lot of what was happening in Cuba down. But I don't think that there were high expectations of what was going to come out of this. One of the things that the Obama administration was really pushing was that, yes, we're going to go there. We're going to try to move this initiative forward a little bit, especially on the business end, with a bunch of business leaders going down there with the president to begin that process. The baseball game that was played yesterday between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cuban national team, all of that was all the goodwill, but you still could see that there were issues. Guantanamo is still a huge issue. The economy and currency is another issue.
Well, and another one too that came up that you heard about a little bit in terms of talking about some of the human rights issues, the idea of Google being part of this and offering to install Google Fiber into Cuba, and some of the people in Cuba, especially some of the dissidents, saying, what good is internet if we aren't able to use it freely, openly, and to be able to access and then share our information as well?
Yeah, supporters of the Cuban regime have long sort of maintained that the transition to democracy is made more difficult because of U.S. hostility. That stance is increasingly hard to take now because of the more open approach taken by the Obama administration. And hopefully what this will see is political rights flourish in Cuba. Cuba often sort of touts its healthcare and education, which are by many measures world class, but they haven't made that transition to democracy. So hopefully that will this process will start.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the 2016 field and the growing focus on Donald Trump and his campaign. The rhetoric has reached a new level now. Appearances and rallies regularly, including physical violence. It started in St. Louis, then Chicago, then Cleveland. Now it's pretty much a part of every event, and Trump just seems to egg them on. And even worse, at least from where I sit, his campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski's alleged involvement in that. There have been 2 incidents where he's been accused of putting his hands on people at Trump events, including this one where we see him grabbing a spectator by the shirt collar. That was in another one of the incidents. There's former Breitbart reporter Michelle Fields. She has filed a police report claiming that he put his hands on her, assaulting her at a press conference, yet we aren't seeing with each of these subsequent interviews of Donald Trump, because it's happening on a daily basis still. No one's really holding him accountable or asking about that.
I find it shocking because in previous elections, whether we're talking about a presidential election, senatorial, or even local, if you have one of your staff members do something like this, the next day they're gone. In this incident, it's almost as if he's become part of the story too, and part of the narrative, and part of the invincibility of Donald Trump. And the fact that you don't have journalists, and I'm talking to not commentators, but actual journalists on the ground, newspaper, television, blogs, whatever, calling them out and saying, hey, we need some answers on how you're going to deal with this, because you have one of your top operatives out here, grabbing people, pushing people, instigating these
other allegations of sexual harassment in different language he's using towards female reporters.
Exactly, and no one's calling him on this. I mean, very few people are calling him on it.
Yeah, it speaks to the broader phenomenon, I guess, of how he seems sort of immune to the laws of normal politics, how he can say things and do things, and his staffers can say things and do things, and he just seems to be immune to this thing. I think the other issue here is that he's an extraordinarily difficult person to interview. Each Sunday I watch Chuck Todd give it the old college try on Meet the Press, and he's extremely difficult to pin down. He's evasive, he dodges the question, no matter how hard the interviewer tries. I mean, he is breaking, certainly challenging the rules of political coverage.
Well, and you invoke the name of Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd saying this week he will no longer allow Donald Trump to telephone in to Meet the Press. If he wants to appear, or if there's reason for him to appear on Meet the Press, it's going to be either via satellite or in person. These phone interviews aren't going to continue happening. And there hasn't really been any other candidate that's been allowed the telephone access to the Sunday morning talk shows or to any kind of news program the way Donald Trump has.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of this has to do with ratings. One of the things that Trump has brought to this campaign, along with everything that Ryan mentioned, is the fact that he brings the needle up when it comes to people watching just to see what he says or what he does.
It's the
or
Howard
what
Stern effect.
You're absolutely right.
You're going to watch him if you love him. You're going to watch him if you hate him, so that you can see what comes next.
Right, and it's become an economic boom for the cable networks, and they're going to, however they can get access to him, be it by phone, be it by Skype, be it by satellite or live, they're going to go with it, because as long as they have him on, people are going to be watching, and they're also watching to see, what is the Republican Party going to do? What is the establishment going to do? So now, where we used to have this sort of, this sort of horse race going on within the elections, now we have these pitched battles of who's going to be able to stop Trump. I mean, every day there's a new story about that.
Yeah, I mean, what's frightening from a journalistic perspective is just how in control of the message Trump is. No matter who's interviewing him, on what station or what network, you watch it and he is absolutely in control of the message, which for any political figure is frightening from a journalistic perspective, but certainly from a political figure who's outside the boundaries of political norms.
Okay, well, we weren't on the air last week, and that meant we really hadn't had much of an opportunity to talk about the controversy surrounding COKIE Roberts, her very anti-Trump column, and the ensuing dust-up at NPR. The Columbia Missourian is one of the papers that runs Steve and COKIE Roberts' syndicated column. Let me read you a line or two from that. They write, if Trump is, quote, nominated by a major party, let alone elected, the reputation of the United States would suffer a devastating blow around the world. He would not make America great again. He would make America weak again. And then it goes on to say, that leaves only one real way to block Trump, convince enough voters that he could be a dangerous choice both for the party and the country. This is a really strong stance that they took in this column, and it's one that turned into a bit of a problem, pretty big one for NPR. Ryan, this was something that you had said specifically you wanted to talk about in joining us today.
Sure, yes. Personally, I think this is an enormous fuss over nothing,
okay,
because COKIE Roberts is she's paid to be an analyst. She's paid to be a commentator. So she receives a paycheck for her opinions. She's not a reporter. She's not an anchor. So the sort of hand-wringing that NPR has gone through, where she was sort of hauled over the coals on Morning Edition, and the host there expressed his disappointment at her essentially for doing her job, is a little perplexing. I think the bigger problem here for NPR is that it doesn't seem to do a very good job of outlining what is the role of a commentator, what is the role of an analyst, and what journalistically did they expect these people to do. It was the same problem they fell into a couple of years back with Juan Williams when he made a comment that he was fired for. It was a bit of an unsavory comment, but it was his opinion nonetheless. So you have these definitions that seem to make perfect sense to NPR, but don't make a whole lot of sense to other journalists, don't make a whole lot of sense to audiences. So I think the lesson for NPR here is to sort of think through, okay, well, we give these people these names, commentator and analyst. Well, what does that mean? What do we expect of these journalists? It's very, very confusing.
And I think it also brings up the issue of objectivity, because that was something that came up in the NPR piece that COKIE Roberts was explaining, and the question of what is objectivity? What does it mean? And can you actually achieve it? And this is something that journalists go back and forth on. And I'm of the opinion that objectivity is a fallacy, and it's something that that journalists say they strive to do, but they never achieve it, because it's really impossible to achieve that, especially when you're talking about it in light of the phenomenon that is Donald Trump.
And that's because we're human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We are human beings. We have feelings, we have emotions, we have biases, and all of those are based on personal experience and what we bring to the job. And that's why a lot of that objectivity, the idea of objectivity among journalists is kind of, I don't want to call it old school, but kind of sort of falling out of fashion a little bit, that it's time that we acknowledge our existence as human beings first.
One of the things that she said in the column was, she's I think she described as being a partisan for democracy, right? She's on the side of democracy, on the side of good governance. And I've heard from many journalists that the sort of worry that as they see their country sort of slipping towards possibly fascism, right? I mean, is it the role, the duty of journalists to sort of sound the alarm and sort of objectivity be damned?
Yeah, I think that's something that we really need to look at. And what all I would say is this, is that, and we talked about this earlier, if Donald Trump or anyone who represents Donald Trump does something that seems out of the norm, out of bounds, which he's done, journalists need to be there to question him and ask him, why are you doing this? Or if you make a statement, what do you mean by that statement? And to allow them just to go on and make these claims and say they're going to do this, we're going to build a wall, we're going to do all these things, and not ask, how are you going to do that? How are you going to make Mexico build a wall? How are you going to make them pay for it? Those kinds of things go far beyond objectivity.
And I guess the part that's a little bit troublesome to me as somebody who would consider myself one of the old school traditional journalists is thinking about the best piece we've seen on that, about the wall and who's going to pay for it and how you're really going to do that, comes from John Oliver on HBO. It comes from what would be considered a non-traditional and almost satirical sort of a news source, not our traditional mainstream media.
I think there's definitely a place for multiple perspectives on this. I absolutely endorse what Earnest says, that we need more sort of holding his feet to the fire in the context of the interview. What I think we also need is more analytical journalism. So, for example, where does Trump stand? Where do his political positions stand relative to the rest of the field? Where do they stand relative to history? You know, he's often described as a populist. Well, that's a historical term. What does that mean? What are the sort of parallels with folks like George Wallace, Huey Long, people like that? I mean, there's scope for a lot of different types of journalism about Donald Trump that I'm not seeing a whole lot of that.
Okay. Well, we're going to change gears pretty significantly here. And that's because the jury has spoken. Gawker was wrong, in its opinion, to publish that tape of Hulk Hogan having sex with his ex-best friend's ex-wife. And for doing it, they're going to have to pay out $115 million in punitive damages and more than $25 million more in compensatory damages. It's a huge verdict, and it's one that could potentially upend Gawker if it's forced to pay out. And don't the online trolls know it? As soon as the verdict came back Friday night, someone went into Gawker's Wikipedia entry and changed the name of the owner of Gawker to Hulk Hogan. The implications of this verdict are great. Could it really mean the end of Gawker?
Yes, if the verdict stands up, I think it does mean the end of Gawker, or it'll
Hulk
be
Hogan
owned by
owns
it'll be
Gawker.
owned by Hulk Hogan. I don't think the damage award is going to hold up. In most cases, those awards are decreased considerably. I also don't think it's going to have much of an impact on the news media. I think this is what we'd call a one-off, where Gawker is going to have to pay the price, but it's not going to have a detrimental impact on the First Amendment and the media to do their jobs. But I do think it sends a message that in these cases like this, where you get a tape from someone else that's third party or fourth party, you need to be careful about whether or not you're going to distribute that, because it could come back to cost you.
Yeah, it's definitely a body blow for Gawker Media, if you'll excuse the pun, and a big victory, I think, for the right to privacy here. I mean, Gawker's entire legal defense was essentially, we're doing this because we can. There was very little ethical reasoning there, or at least they believed that they could. And so this is an organization that's overstepped the boundaries on many occasions. Now finally they've got burned. So it's very hard.
They poked the bear one too many times.
Very hard to have sympathy for them. Absolutely. I mean, and the rhetoric that sometimes has been said about the chilling effect, right? That there's going to be a chilling effect on speech. I don't buy that. I call that the Chicken Little effect, right? The sort of the sky is falling. The First Amendment's going to come tumbling down all of a wrestler's sex tape. No way. That's not a serious proposition, right? I think that if it does mean that journalists or gossip merchants, because I wouldn't call people who work at Gawker journalists, if they stop and think twice about whether sharing a celebrity sex tape in the future, then that's a chilling effect that I can get on board with.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where when you put that up and you're trying to get the clickbait, you're going to have to think twice about doing it, because it could cost you more than it's actually earning you.
Absolutely.
Well, I can get behind that too. There has been so much for us to talk about today, and we are running out of time. But before we go, I want to take a chance to talk about Twitter's 10th birthday and the major disruptor that microblogging and that specific microblogging site has proven to be. And if anything is going to prove it, it's the last half hour and the discussions we've had, because so many of these stories, all of them, frankly, driven by Twitter.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there was a lot of Twitter activity yesterday morning about the Brussels bombings, and there was definitely a lot of. We just saw one a minute ago on the Hulk Hogan. So there's so many subjects that you can send out. And 10 years ago, you never thought about that. I mean, you had people that were tweeting, "I'm walking down the street" and that sort of thing. And now it's
when I joined Twitter, I was convinced it was about people fighting about peanut butter and which was better, chunky or creamy. Like I had to be convinced about the ways it could be used in the course of committing acts of journalism.
And I must confess that I still don't have a Twitter account.
Nor
I
do
don't
I.
believe that Earnest does either. So happy birthday, Twitter.
So let me ask you guys then, what is it that keeps you off of it? What is it that hasn't gotten you in yet?
What you just said, because there's still people out there who are having these Twitter wars about things that make no sense and have no relevancy to me and my life.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I'm just an unusual person. I'm a late adopter to just about every technology, so I'm, the last person to ask about this. But certainly what we have seen and what a lot of the research and practice is bearing out, that Twitter has fundamentally changed journalistic routines, incorporating them into people's reporting routines, and it's also changed the pace of the news cycle as well. So it's had a big effect. So that's a big thing.
That's one of the things that I would agree. I think one of the things that has really helped, that Twitter has helped, is getting information out to people very quickly. I mean, we were able to, at least just here on campus, when something happens and they need to get word out to students and faculty and staff very quickly, they can use Twitter to do that. To get information to loved ones about, I'm okay, things are all right, you can use Twitter to do that. So I think it does have some benefits. One of the dangers, though, is that the anonymity of Twitter and many of the online tools that we use, that is still becoming a problem.
The potential for anonymity, the potential for there is plenty of bad that can go on there. I also look at the
proliferation
impact
of hate speech. I mean,
absolutely,
Twitter has just been huge.
Absolutely. But I also look at the Arab Spring. I look at entire revolutions that have happened because of microblogging. I look at how we've been able to reassess people's safety. Like yesterday morning, that was how I found my students and knew that they were okay, because I'd see that they were active on Twitter. It changes how we do our jobs as journalists, and it's changed it dramatically.
Absolutely. It's a tool. It's a technology, right? And so it doesn't change the underlying purpose of how a technology is used, which is then, do you apply traditional journalistic values
which
to that
absolutely
setting?
needs to be done in order for it to be used effectively as that tool. Well, we are pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about each of the topics that we talked about today on our links blog. That's under the programs tab at KBIA.org. We also invite you to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again. You can leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next time, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show. Maya Jackson is our technical director. Pat Akers handled the audio for us today, and Chelsea Vaughn is our associate producer. We're going to take a little bit of a break next week, but we will be back with you on April 6th for another edition of Views of the News.